back with another episode of the Next One Up podcast. I'm Angelica. Of course, y'all know that. Hopefully, y'all know that. And today's guest is somebody I've known since I was a little girl. I think you helped with one of the pageants that I was in, like when I was really, really young. But I know her as a teacher and a coach and, you know, this amazing athlete, Miss Fay. I want to say Fay Peterkin, but I'm going to say Miss Fay Gore. She's married, Miss Fay Gore. I appreciate you and thank you and welcome to the Next One Up podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm super excited.
Well, you know, I was polling and asking people like, hey, who do y'all want to see next on the podcast? And a lot of people, Latoya Ray actually was one of the ones that mentioned your name. She was like, Fay Peterkin or whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about Miss Peterkin. So yeah, like you were one of the top ones that people would mention. So I was like, I gotta reach out to her and see if she'll come on or whatever. I know you're pretty busy. So I just wanted, I'm like, oh, when you said yes, I was really, really excited about it. So, but
I'll always make time for Hoke County. So
look,
that's my home in my heart. So
you know what? Most people say the same thing, and it's so cool to hear that because you know sometimes people they don't have that connection to their home, their hometown. But to hear people constantly say like anything for Hoke County, anything for Rayford, it's like it warms my heart because I feel the same way. So you know, it's really great to hear. So let's start from the beginning. When did you start your sports journey? And then what sports did you play?
sure. So I think my sports journey actually goes way, way back as a little girl, because my family, my nuclear family, is sports fanatics, particularly my dad. So I grew up, even when I didn't want to, watching sports. And so one of the ways that I really connected with my dad was sitting down to watch football with him. We were a Dallas Cowboys family. Lord help us now.
My mama is a Dallas Cowboy fan, so I understand. I understand growing up.
Yes. And so I would watch him and the intensity in which he watched the game. And I wanted to know more about, you know, the rules and what they were playing. And so I got involved in that way. And my mom was also an athlete in high school. My dad played sports. He's an athlete. And so it made me as a young age wanted to get involved. Like I love to see the adrenaline rush of it. I love to see the competition. I hated to lose, so I wanted to be better at it. In fact, playing with my cousins, I was both a tomboy and a prissy girl. So I felt like I could play football with them. So I started even informally like trying to get into the football games with my cousins. But I actually started like really informal sports, you know, during field days in elementary school. And I thought it was just first because I was tall and had long legs that I could outrun everybody. But over time, I started to see, you know, like I had some real talent. And particularly my dad pushed me because, you know, he would have us out in the yard, taking us to the park. He was always involving us in some kind of sports. And so I mainly played a little bit of basketball. And I say that because I felt like I was a horrible basketball player. My love actually was volleyball. I loved volleyball and I started that in middle school. But probably my talent really lied in track and field, and I was a hurdler. You know, throughout high school, and I also was a recruited walk-on at UNC Chapel Hill, and I ran hurdles just 1 year. So that's kind of where my journey began, like in the family, and then you know playing for school.
So was your dad? Would your dad be considered the person who inspired you to start playing sports?
Yeah, I would say that. Sometimes I thought he was like living out his hopes and dreams because he really pushed us, and not just me, but my two brothers too. He really pushed them, but probably me harder because I probably played more sports. but he was always especially encouraging us on the off season to do some real work. He was always about conditioning and really understanding the game. My dad would come to most of our games. In fact, he probably was the side coach, and I had to tell him, stop coaching, especially other other girls. He would come and videotape the games and meets, and then when we come home, he would sit down, replay them, and kind of walk me through like what I did well and what I didn't. But so I think he was the biggest inspiration in terms of that. But I think also my mom played a big role because she knew how my brain worked, like as a perfectionist. And I would come home and I would cry, I didn't do this well, I didn't win. And so she was the motivator, like, no, it's okay. You're not going to win them all. So she probably was the one that probably helped keep me in the games when things got tough.
And that's actually great to have. It seemed like there was a balance there. It was somebody who was like motivating you, but then somebody who was like pushing you and, kind of making like giving you that drive and desire. So that was cool that you had the balance of the two, because normally it's like one parent and the other, like one parent is the pusher and the other parent's just kind of sitting there and they don't, say too much. So that's really cool.
They were the yin and yang for sure.
Right, exactly. Now, who specifically like were your sports influencers, like influences? Who really who influenced you when it comes to sports?
So I'm honestly, I can say I can't think of like really a famous person necessarily that was an influence to me. I just loved watching sports and seeing people. Again, I go back to probably like my parents were greatest influences, and probably like my older cousins who played sports before me, and I saw their successes. For example, Benita Doby, my cousin, and she was a phenomenal basketball player at Hoke County, and I would always be in awe of her playing and her talent. And I would often go with her to the neighborhood basketball court, and she would be playing with the boys. Like there's no girls there, and she would be balling. I mean, like straight doing it. And I'm sitting there like, oh, wow, just, in awe of her work. So those are kind of the people that kind of like inspired me to want to be better. Although basketball wasn't my thing, but just seeing that drive, kind of inspired me. But also, like I grew up where, my family told me about Kathy McMillan, right? And as we all know, she's an Olympian from Hoke County, right? And so she probably was the greatest inspiration around like, wow, I could be an Olympian, like planting that seed, or I want to run track. And so I think those hometown people were probably my greatest influence, and just coaches who inspired me, teachers who encouraged me. Those are the folks that I look to that were like my greatest inspiration in terms of playing sports.
Yeah. What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1991.
Okay.
And that actually was the year that I won the state championship in the 100-meter hurdles.
Oh.
So yeah, we I can tell you a story about it as it comes up. But yeah. So like I feel like I usually, at least our class thought that like the 90s were like probably the late 80s, the early 90s were like some of the best sports years for Hoke County, because our baseball team, I think in 1990, won the state championship. So I grew up seeing all these people like John Roper and Derek Graham and, all of these folks like being winners, right? And I'm like, they can do it. Like, certainly we can do it, right? And my classmate, Marcelle McKenzie, I mean, she won the state championship in the 300-meter hurdles 3 years, right? Like, starting with her freshman year. This is my track teammate. And so seeing these folks, like it wasn't like necessarily who people would consider like famous or super. These are the people like I'm growing up with are the people that really inspire me, because I'm seeing it right in my hometown. Right. Yeah. And it gives you this kind of, not necessarily cockiness, because I never consider myself to be that. I always try to be humble in whatever I do, but it gives you that kind of drive to know like we come from greatness in Hope County, right? Like it's a pride thing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, well, that's one of my other questions, because I think that a lot of times people underestimate us, and people that the visual us, they don't see that. They may not see that, we come from, greatness, and they may see that we're just from a small town, old Hope County, or whatever the case may be, but really that's not the case at all.
Absolutely, absolutely. I remember my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, my dad's father, used to take us to baseball games in the National Guard Armory Park. Used to be a huge baseball field. They had like two fields there, and they had traveling teams coming in. And my dad told me that actually my grandfather almost went to the Negro League, like growing up. So I mean, like I feel like it's in my blood. My grandmother played softball when she was, younger.
Mhm.
So I feel like like that blood of, and it's not even just about the sport. It's about the teamwork, the camaraderie. Those are the things that held us together as a community. Like our families went to these games, we gathered, right? And so I think it's more than just the actual sport. It's what it did for our culture and for who we are. And especially during times of like segregation, you know, it brought us together. It gave us a sense of pride. It helped us know that we come from greatness and we can do great things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My dad, he is on one of the episodes, and he talked about his experience playing baseball, and he actually used to play travel ball. But just like his experience of growing up, and you know, them teaching each other how to play the sport, and it bringing them together and stuff like that. So yeah, I like hearing those stories growing up, which is part of the reason why I wanted him to be on the podcast, because he had a different, like, just a perspective when it comes to, and a different time in which he was playing. So I felt like it was an important story to hear. And it's so great that you mentioned it, because that was something that influenced you as well, that you were able to see, like, in the early 90s from somebody else that was in a different generation and like played in a different time than you did. So that's really, really cool. So what do you do now? What is your career now? Because I mean, I know you as, a teacher and a coach. So what is your career now?
Yeah, so I'm still proud to say I'm an educator, right? Like, as you said, I started my career as a classroom teacher. But, over the years, I left the classroom, but I didn't leave education. So I worked a few years at NC State University developing assessments, for state tests. And then I spent 12 years at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, developing the state standards for social studies for K-12, and developing trainings for teachers and curricular resources and those types of things. And for the past 3.5 years, I've actually been at National Geographic as a regional director, and now I'm a senior director for our global delivery team on our education team. And so what I do is work with partners to help kind of spread and scale like our educational resources at National Geographic, introduce teachers and other non-formal educators to our resources and our experiences. So I've never left the field of education. It's just different, things. Most of my, career has been in public education, but now I'm in more like informal education, but still, having that desire to make sure that, especially young people who are furthest from opportunities, have high quality instructional materials in their classroom, and all of our resources are free. So like there's no excuse. Like good teachers need to get these resources and share them. And having a big brand like National Geographic developing these things to support education is like a kind of a mission and a passion for me now.
That's so cool, because I mean, of course, grew up reading National Geographic, but I would never expect like that to be something where they have like that liaison between like the schools, the teachers, and then like the actual publication. And just, I would have never thought, and I mean, it's so amazing, like you said, the broadness and the different opportunities that you have in different sectors, and especially in education. Like, we always think of an educator being just someone that's in the classroom, but like
Right.
you said, you were the person that was developing the assessments and, you know, the different testing and stuff for it. So it's just amazing, because I feel like it, and you're a Black woman doing that, and I think that that helps, like you said, like making sure that our students have, especially the ones that may not have what they need, make sure they have what they need, or at least the opportunity to have that. But I think it's so important, being that you're a Black woman, that you are like helping to provide that opportunity, because I feel like sometimes we get forgotten about, our kids get forgotten
Yeah.
about, and it's so important for them to have the same access to information as anybody else. So I think that's so cool that you were like in that position at National Geographic, of all things. Like, oh my God, like that's so cool.
I know. It to me, it speaks to not so much about me, but also like my upbringing, right? And I tie everything that I've ever done in my life back to Hoke County. And I just had about a week or so ago, had a really good conversation with my uncle, who was in the Air Force for most of my growing up years, and so he got to see the world. And I told him, like, he planted that seed in me to want to not think of myself as, I don't care what people think about me as a Black woman. I don't care what people think about me coming from a small rural town in Hoke County. He always said that it doesn't matter where you come from, right? Like, people in Hoke County come from greatness and they can do great things. And so that really inspired me, because even throughout my years, like, I've been able to travel abroad and do a lot of different things. Like, I used to do a lot of, prior to COVID, a lot of independent consulting with schools overseas. And a lot of that was because, I had an extended family. My village, right, believed in me. They invested in me. Teachers in Hoke County invested in me. And so I had that kind of cover or blanket around me of support that taught me that I could do whatever I want to do. I'll go back to my dad a lot, because he taught me that Black is beautiful. Like, I grew up in the 70s. I was born in the 70s, right? And he instilled that pride. No matter like, Black is beautiful. Like, don't let anybody tell you, because of your race or your ethnicity, that you can't do anything. And, like, to me, that is also a driver for me, because I see that, like, we see it in sports, and a lot of times we look at athletics, but there's other ways in which we can show our greatness too, and we need to display that also more. I think it goes hand in hand. And I saw myself as an athlete, sure, but I saw myself as a student athlete, and the student first. And I think that's also important, because, as you can see, I'm not I'm not playing sports right now. Like, that's not my career trajectory, but it also played a large part in shaping who I am. And I hope that people recognize that too, that it's, being an athlete is more than the sport that you play also.
That's so interesting that you say that, because recently, last year, student athletes were able to start making money off their name, image, and likeness. And I'm a sports agent now, but my desire has always been to want to be like a sports agent, sports and entertainment attorney. And like, when I think, honestly, when I think about like my journey as to why I wanted to do so, it goes back to Hoke County. But also, when I'm thinking about, like, how to help these young athletes, I think about like what options they have, and like them understanding that they are more than just an athlete, and they can decide what they want to do. You know what I'm saying? Like, they can decide that they want to use their opportunity to play sports in college as, the foundation, or even just like a catalyst into maybe their next career, or knowing that they're going to come out of school debt free. But they could also use it as, maybe, I can make a little money while I'm in school to help myself, maybe help my family, but also I can use this as an opportunity to meet people in my industry and blah, 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 blah. And it's just so interesting because I think that a lot of times, people, especially growing up, if you have a lot of talent, people always want to push you to be a professional athlete as far as doing it as a career, not realizing that it's just so much more than that. And playing sports really does provide you with so many transferable skills that you can use in everyday life and your career. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think it needs to be said more. It's a conversation that we need to have more, and I intend on, like, as I continue to build my career, that is something that I discuss, because it's something that you really like. It needs to be ingrained that I have options. I can do more. I don't have to be just this one thing, because a lot of, like, even in the news and politics and stuff, a lot of fans and a lot of people would be like telling athletes just shut up and play and all this other stuff, and it's just like so much more than that.
That's exactly right. I'm still a human. I'm still a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
I can contribute in so many ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
So, as an athlete, what was some of the challenges that you faced during your journey, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. I think some of the challenges were, as we already talked about, we were from a small rural town and with not a lot of access to like high quality equipment, from one. Like I remember our hurdles were like abysmal. Like they they were pitiful. We could hardly hold some of them up, and some of them were so like they had like these heavy metal things at the bottom that if you hit them, you're done. Like so, so that's part of it, right? Like, but I don't think that stopped our determination. That was one challenge. I also think another challenge sometimes is exposure. Like, you know, growing up, my family didn't have a lot of money, but my family, my parents scraped together some money and sent me to camp, right, so that I could get a little bit more exposure, outside of Hoke County, because sometimes you need to see it in order to be it, right? Like, so having different types of competition or more competition so that like, wow, I'm thinking I have this raw talent, which is good, but I also need to know the game. I
Mm-hmm.
need to have strategy. It's not just about raw talent. Like to be a hurdler, you got to know like your pace. You got to practice. You have to know the skills. And I'll have to say this. I feel like I had really good coaches that cared about me, as a person. But there, in some instances, we didn't have enough coaches. So to have coaching specialists were few and far between, right? To help develop that talent a little bit further. And if you don't have the financial means to be able to go outside and get some additional or be on a traveling team, when I got to Carolina, I felt like in terms of athletics, I was way out of my league.
Mm-hmm.
So I just so happened that our state championship meet was at Carolina, and so
Oh.
when I won, it just so happened that the hurdle coach from California was at the meet and saw me. And so I met him. And because I was already going there, I had an academic scholarship. He asked me, did I want to walk onto the team? But I felt so much out of my league because while I won the state championship from North Carolina is one state of 50, right? But also, we're talking about competing with folks globally, not just like, so I might have felt like, hey, I'm big stuff. And I didn't really feel that way because I still felt like I needed to have more. So when you don't have a lot of like a strong you have the strong foundation, but you don't have that competition to push you and drive, you stay at a certain level. And then when you meet this other competition, you're like, what in the world? These people are running at pin relays, junior Olympics, like around the world. And I'm like, this is who you want me to compete with? So sometimes the challenges are also mental. Like you might not have the full range of experiences that you need, but also some of that mental. And I probably didn't wasn't maybe passionate enough. I don't know if it was a lack of passion or I felt like, I also got an academic scholarship. I need to focus on that. But the preparation that is required to be an elite athlete, right? I never considered myself to be an elite athlete. right? I think I did a great job. Like, I mean, how many people can say they won a state championship, right? But to be like an elite athlete, you got to take it to the next level. And I always, again, go back to some of the teachings that my dad had when he was really trying to push me to do more, to practice, on the off season, practice on the weekends. That's what it takes to be a great athlete. And sometimes we take it for granted that because we do have it in our blood, because we have some raw talent, that's enough to sustain us. And it's not enough to sustain us at that level. So I think that those are some of the challenges that maybe I faced, along my journey. And then also being able to balance athletics with, with your schooling, right? Because that's tough. And I think people don't also think about that. They either see you as this really good athlete or you're really smart, right? And they don't really understand what it takes to be both of those things and the complexity of what you might be facing, at home. I know, some of my classmates had to have jobs. And so there's so many things that you have to tackle that sometimes take you off the focus of that. So I've seen challenges beyond maybe those that I've faced that I see, other athletes might have faced, too.
Right. Right. And that's good because I'm always trying to figure out like or at least analyze the difference between what athletes faced in the past and what they're facing now, and just I guess the comparison of the two, because a lot of things that you would think as time goes on, things evolve and maybe we would not have those same issues or those same struggles that the athletes now, but they do. And those sound like things that I hear athletes talk about on TV or online or whatever the case may be. And so it's just very interesting that I guess at the end of the day we still are people,
That's
and
right.
everybody's circumstances still very much the same. Or you find a lot of athletes may have like the same kind of story, coming from a small town, coming from impoverished places, single parent, household, whatever, that they struggle. But like you said, going that extra mile to go to the next level and being elite is so important. And it sounds like also being able to have that confidence, because being able to compete, it helps to build that confidence. And without that confidence, that's like a barrier to kind of really catapult you to the next level. So yeah.
Absolutely. I would say I love what you just said too about, the comparison between what athletes may have faced in the past and what they face now. I think a lot of it is the same, like you said, because we are human. I think what gets amplified now that's different from when I was a student athlete, like in high school, is social media, right? Like, so, as a female, we have body images. Like I was tall and skinny, and the uniforms that you have to wear sometimes even can distract you from the competition because you have, guys in the stands that might be making comments about certain things, you know, you know, you might have body images because you might be a little bit heavier than other folks. So there's still those kinds of things. Fortunately, we didn't have social media, right? Like I had to hear, like I could end, like the comments would end after, but you internalize a lot of that stuff too, right? And so, or the way you play as you're evolving in your journey, you might start out like I wasn't always somebody who could win a state championship, in the beginning. So like I struggled in certain areas. And so you had to have some kind of support. We talk about, like self-care and the mental aspect of that, right? And making sure you're taking care of your mental health. We didn't talk about mental health when I was, growing up, right? And so a lot of people had to figure out they either suppressed it, you know, like we took a lot for some of our coaches, right? Like we had to there was no hold barred, right? Like there were some things that I'm like, oh my God, if I had a child that had to endure some of this stuff, you know? And sometimes it's part of the game and trying to motivate you, but sometimes you don't know how each child might internalize that. But now social media amplifies it, right? Because now you have, if you're on Twitter, you get to see that. If you're on Facebook or if you're on Instagram, the conversations continue. And so a lot of times young people have to contend with that, whether they're good enough in terms of their talent, but just their physical being can be impacted, right? And so there's a lot of things. I mean, like, we can go on and on, but I don't want to belabor it. But there's a whole lots of things around jealousy and how we, support each other or not support each other. So there's lots of things, but I think social media amplifies some of the challenges that you face, because you can't get rid of it if you're going to be in those platforms. And so I think we need to be mindful of that too.
Absolutely. And of course, like, people think this is very harmless, right? And they say things, and we all, I'm sure if you engage in social media activity, like, we all like have our opinions about stuff, but some people are just like unhinged.
That's right.
And
That's right.
like, and we've been hearing a lot about how athletes have been, really wanting to do more self-care, like Kyrie Irving or like Naomi Osaka, you
Yes.
know and it's just, it's so amazing, because I interviewed John Roper Kid, and
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
talked about mental health, and saying basically, and y'all right there with each other, and the things that was not talked about, and you didn't really know, being so young, you didn't know how to balance it, you didn't know how to tackle that issue, and then you go into adulthood not really knowing how to manage those things, and it kind of can spill over into your regular everyday life outside of being an athlete. So it's just so interesting that that's one of the things I think that we definitely need to talk to our kids about, is self-care and more mental health things, because it's going to determine who they are as a person. And I mean, I'd be talking about how my parents, they're so like hard. I mean, they're, they're not hard, but you know what I mean? Like, their mentality and the way they think, and just like, I remember my stepmom, she was like, we would talk about how, now I wouldn't want to accept certain treatment from my parents or whatever. And they're like, psh, that was the thing back then. Like, she was like, y'all some wusses or whatever. Like, y'all can't take certain things, and y'all got to be taught to a certain way, and blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. It was
Yes.
like, but
Okay.
what y'all received was a little bit abusive. Like,
Same.
that
Same.
wasn't.
Absolutely. And if you think about the era in which they grew up, they had to be hard because they were dealing with extreme racism,
Yeah.
right? Like, in some ways we don't have to deal with. We were covered from some of that, right? That they had to deal with. Like, they had certain rules about how they looked, what they said, where they went. So it was a protection for them. So I get some of that now.
Mhm.
But, to your point, like, now it's you know, like, to quit a sports team was like, no, you just didn't do that, right? So fortunately, I did have parents that, while, like, especially my dad, like, he was hard like that, like, no, suck it up, that kind of thing. And like, my mom was more the like softer side, like, you'll be okay, give me a hug, I needed that because I had to make a decision. Like, I quit basketball when I was in high school. I played, I think I got the Antler Award for lettering in 3 sports. So my junior and senior year, I didn't play basketball because I was like, I don't have the passion for that. And to have to tell my dad, like, I'm not playing basketball, like, he's like, what's wrong? Like, what? Like, why? You're not doing what? Like, but I had space to make the decision. And it was a hard decision because I'm thinking about, well, what are my coaches going to say? Am I letting my teammates down? I wasn't that good of a. I'm like, so I had to make a decision. Like, I can't continue this level of, focusing on track and focusing on volleyball, focusing on my schooling and all of the after school activities I was in, and maintaining all this. So I have to let something go. The same thing when I got to college. It was a hard decision to say, like, people like, you're crazy. You're on the Carolina track team. I mean, like, you're running with, like, your coach was an Olympic hurdler, like a gold medalist in the hurdles. You're running with, like, Tisha Waller, who's on, like, all of these different people. You would give that up? Yeah, because I have to think about myself and my capacity and what I can do. And it was a hard decision because I'm also thinking I'm letting my town down. Like I'm letting my family down because I'm not doing this. They see me as they can brag and say I'm doing this, but it wasn't a good thing for me. Like I remember coaches, oh my gosh, I had some wonderful coaches giving me the key to the track so I can come home during during my breaks so I can continue my training. To have to say that I'm not playing, in college anymore was a hard decision. But we also have to give people grace and say you're not a quitter because you stopped playing this sport. In fact, my life was so much better because I did. And who was I playing for, right? And so we have to have those conversations with young people too. Now, of course, I'm not saying just to give up because it's hard. That's not, you have to think about, what is your passion points and what do you want to spend your energy doing and what can you really contribute to? And that should be your decision making. And we need to respect that and support people in those, because it's not an easy decision for people to say, I don't have the capacity to do this anymore.
And that's so good, because I find myself when I'm watching sports, or um you hear about people's stories, or them finally retiring, or them thinking about it, and it's just like um realizing the pressure that it takes for people deciding to stop
Mhm.
and when to hang it up.
Yep.
And particularly I think a lot about this, a lot more with like football players,
Yep.
because of like the CTE and the different things. And it was this I forgot his name, but this football player who he passed away from a seizure like in December, either November or December, and he, like, basically, I guess because of his health condition, was forced to retire last summer. And
Mhm.
then he ends up, you know, passing away, and he's like 32 or 33, super young. And
Yeah.
it's just like, were the signs there for him to stop earlier, and he just didn't, because he was grappling with
Yeah.
that decision. One, probably, like, maybe because football was all he knew, was his persona, and
Yeah.
then he might be providing for his family, or trying to figure out his next step, what to do. And maybe it's like, in my mind, I'm wondering, I was like, dang, I wonder, does he have CTE? Because we know, they don't know whether you have CTE until after you're gone. um but if he's having seizures, and he wasn't having seizures before, apparently, it's like, well, was football like the in there? And it makes me wonder, like, it's kind of like you put your real life on the line for this, and people completely discount that. Like, when they
Right.
call you a quitter, or when
Yes.
they say this, or they have their opinions, it's just like, you don't have any idea what I'm dealing with and why I had to make the decision that I had to make. And I'm sure he probably got blowback for even making the decision, deciding to quit, because he's only 30 something, you know what I mean? But it's just so important, like, to have that conversation. And like you said, it's not about quitting because it's hard, because I mean, life is hard.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Right. Everything's gonna be hard at some
exactly,
point.
everything
Right.
is going to be hard. You can't quit everything just because it's hard. But also understanding that, as an athlete, like you said, you're more than just that, and making the decisions to do what's best for you. Because I imagine, like you said, like, that's, you went to Carolina and on, like, track team and this, that, and the third, and just, the pressure. I'm glad that you didn't allow, and I'm glad you had the support system that you had to make that decision, because it allowed you to be okay and know that you could come home and still have that support, versus some people feel like they can't show their face when they
Right.
quit. If they quit, or if they stop, they can't come back home, they can't show their face. Like, people have these perceptions, and it's just like, I'm so embarrassed to the
Yes.
point where I can't even go back home where I thought I felt safe.
That's right. Absolutely. And I also think too, for me, is like I feel like I was fortunate in that a lot of things that I did well and I was able to accomplish it, like from academics to athletics. And from a little child, my mama always said this. It's like you had this crazy perfectionist attitude. Like everything had to be just so. Like my socks had to be just so. Like everything had to be just so. And I don't know where I get that personality from. So for me to admit that I couldn't do this was harder than actually quitting. Like I could have probably stayed at, like, but also I had to come to terms with myself that, you know, this is not my path forward. Like I'm not going to be an elite athlete. Do I want to keep my scholarship and focus on my schooling, or do I want to keep trotting along, pretending that I can be this elite athlete on the track team? Like for instance, like my freshman year when I ran, Carolina girls won the conference championship, the ACC championship that year. I mean, mind blowing. I don't feel part of that, right? Because I don't feel like my talent was at that level to even receive it, right? So some of these things help you, and I'll say this. I think my faith also, like I talk about my family and support system, but I think my faith was also the biggest driver in helping me. Being able to have those talks, and this is my beliefs, my having those talks with God and be rooted in a belief that God's got me, I think also helps with that mental aspects of it. So it gave me like the courage to be able to make a difficult decision. But also to your point, it gave me the courage to say, if anybody comes at me about this, let me tell y'all the real deal. And take a look at yourself and look at them. And I'm working with this leadership group, and we talk about looking in the mirror, like the mirror effect. And looking in the mirror is to examine yourself so that you are so clear about who you are that when outside forces come in, you know who you are because you've looked in the mirror, not to critique yourself, but to know yourself. And I think, having that background, the background of my religion helps me also know that, because I'm like, God is planting these seeds. God is giving me these gifts. And God is helping me with these decisions, and he's going to help me with the steps, the aftermath of that. And so we also have to take a look at like who we are, and we don't spend enough time with young people, I think, from the cradle, preparing them for that kind of decision. We don't wait until they get in high school or college and then they have to go to counselors and all that kind of stuff. No, you start from cradle, preparing them for that mirror, with everything that you got around your culture and your beliefs, so that they can have that support that they need when they are facing all of these challenges along the way.
Yeah, that's so good. Oh my goodness. So good. So good. Okay, so I just and I we could talk about this all day long. Oh my goodness, all day long. What I know that you talked about, what it takes to be an elite athlete and kind of go to the next level. Well, what are 3 characteristics that you think that make an athlete great?
Oh, that I love that question. I think there's three things, and not necessarily in this order, but I think to be an elite athlete, or to be a great athlete, you have to practice, practice, practice. The more you practice and get your technique down, no matter what that sport is, that makes you great in that, in that sport. Practicing even more than the game, because I know some people like to get to the game and they show out because that you think that's the natural talent. But if you want to be a great athlete, that sustained practice, practice, practice technique is knowledge of the game, right? Like I think about a quarterback on the football team. They know, like they're the quarterbacks because they know the plays. They know, they have instinct because they know the game, right? They've studied the greats. They know the game. I also think, and this might roll all into one, desire and motivation. I think is important because if you want to be a great athlete, it's not always about the winning, though. It's about your motivation and desire to get back up when you fall. And I think that's what I credit my mom for. Like when I'm coming home, like, I didn't play a good game. I didn't have that many hits in volleyball. Like she's the one that was like, okay, what are you going to do tomorrow? Right? Like that's today. Like you got another game on Thursday. Oh, so she's planting those seeds. And the last thing I'll say about that for me is being a great athlete is about humbleness. It's not being cocky. It's not always being the top of your field. It's about humbleness and understand where that greatness lies so that you can be a light and a model for other people. To me, that is a great athlete, right? It's, and some people say, I'm not a role model. Like, and you're probably not. And you're probably not a great athlete. You can play the game, but you're not a great athlete. I think, again, great athletes are more than just the game itself. And I think that's what makes Hoke County athletes great, because I know so many athletes that have come back to Hoke and given back, whether through coaching, through philanthropy, sharing talks, whatever it might be. It's being that role model out in the world, I think, is the most important part of being a great athlete.
And I haven't heard that. Of all the interviews that I've done, I haven't heard the humbleness part, which I think is super important. Like that definitely I feel like it's something that everybody needs to think about when it comes to who they are as people. But like you said, like some people don't want to be freaking role models. Like they like I just want to do whatever I want to do and be ignored. But
Right.
like but it doesn't always work that way, and sometimes you do have to identify that, yeah, people are looking at me and I might need to, like, straighten up, or really pay attention to what I do, because people are paying attention and I have that influence um to influence others. So what does it mean for to be an athlete from Hope County? I mean, we've talked a little bit, hit a few little points, but I would love, like, the direct question: what does it mean
Oh my
to
God.
you to be an athlete from Hope County?
It means the world to me when I think about, like, a few years ago, I was just blown away when I was invited or inducted into the Athletic Hall of Fame at Hope County. I mean, first of all, it totally floored me. I wasn't even ever thinking that was not even a consideration ever in my mind. And I look at the list of people that have been honored, like before me and after me, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm among, like, people would think enough about, like, who I am and what I might have, contributed to be among these people. And when I look at, again, when I look at who is in that group of folks, I mean, like, I, I can start naming some, but I'll forget people. But these people were more to me than athletes, right? Again, these are a lot of people that I looked up to, people that actually supported me on my journey, people that had pride for what Hoke stood for. I feel like in everything, in every athletic endeavor, it was always about having good character, showing good sportsmanship, leaving everything on the field or the court. These are the things that the coaches taught me. And I remember Coach George McNeil, oh, one of my favorites.
Me too.
He would always say to our track team, the cream rises to the top. He would tell us that all the time. And so I that has been instilled in me. So when I see a Hope County athlete, I remember I was when I was in college, my brother who played football, Josh, he played football for Central. Like, they were playing Northern Durham. Oh my God, it was like a million people, it felt like, from Hope County that came to that game today. Me and my friend, I don't know, we hitched a ride with somebody to get to that game. And just to see that red, black, and white and the pride, Buck pride all day, every day. I mean, just to say that when you ask that question, I lit up because I love my hometown. I love Hope County. I love that we had, like, this kind of pride and camaraderie that extends, like, for years. And I would be remiss if I did not give homage to, like, one of my great inspirations that I haven't mentioned yet, Elgin Blue.
Mm.
So he was my cousin, right? And he actually was helping, like, support, like, I think he was coaching football maybe when I was in high school. And he would always sit down with me. He would always support me, particularly around track. He would come to the games. He would have conversations with me. When I came back and was a teacher, he encouraged me. He supported. He and I and my now husband started this nonprofit at one point where we supported. We started doing summer camps for kids for basketball and volleyball, and to me that, like, I was in awe. Like, he was this super football player who went to college and came back. That's what, being from Hope County means. It's about contributing beyond that sport, encouraging, mentoring. I mean, I could go on and on about what it means to be an athlete from Hope County. So to be in a list of a number, and even if you're not in that list, just being an athlete alone, you got some life lessons, right? And from humble beginnings, like we didn't have a lot of money. Like we still don't have a lot of money in Hope County, right? It's so that togetherness. I remember like my mom bringing snacks to to the track meets, sharing them. She's if other team members that weren't fortunate enough to have their parents with them, she's the one that when they're crying, she's consoling them. It's a family. Being an athlete from Hope County is about community. It's about the village. And I don't know, Angelica, I could go on and on, but to me, maybe those are the two words that I really think about is community, and pride.
Do you think that that's and it's so funny you mentioned all that, and then just like, oh my God, it just warms my heart because I like I'm right there. But it's so crazy because we're often like underestimated. That's the crazy thing. Like, and people see when we show up at those, far off games and stuff, and we like, okay, everybody, we going, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of not even a question. Like people don't even have to ask, like, are y'all going to the game? You know what I mean? It's like, oh no, we going. If we can drive there, we're going. We're going.
Gonna get a charter bus.
Exactly.
We're gonna get some sandwiches on the bus and some drinks. Somebody gonna fry some chicken. We're going to the game.
But it's so interesting because we've gone to so many different places around North Carolina. And I feel like, when you hear people talk about us or our athletes, we are very underestimated. What do you think made our athletes different? And why do you think people underestimate us the way they do?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just a mentality if you come from a small town that it's not going to be, you're not going to be, that great. I think some of it has to also do with, people like to look at stats and they like to look at how many state championships you've won and all of that kind of thing. And so I think that's probably some of that underestimation. And I think we're not always like really brash, right? Like, I can name a few, schools that we compete against that you would think, oh, like you're rolling your eyes right now thinking about who they are, right? And I like to be that underdog though, because that gets my adrenaline going. It's like, I'm going to show you. You say I can't? Okay, I'm going to show you better than I can tell you, right? And so I think that also is what motivates us. And it goes back to like being humble, like recognizing that you are the underdog, because sometimes when you're always like at the top of your game and people are looking at you, sometimes you slip a little bit, right? And so I don't mind necessarily being that underdog, but I think a lot of it is just when people look at stats or they look at like what town you come from and they judge you based on some of those kinds of things versus, how you're going to show up on the field. And I think that's what motivates us though. Is being that underdog.
Absolutely. Now you possibly mentioned it early on in the interview, but what would you say is your best sports moment or memory?
Oh yeah, so I'm gonna come back to my story. Okay, so this kind of combines. So I think most people probably would think winning the state championship would be my greatest sports moment. But I would say that was just a culmination of things. I think probably my greatest sports moment was my freshman year, my very first track meet. I ran hurdles. I got to probably maybe the third to the last or the second to the last hurdle. I hit that hurdle and I fell. And I slid. But I got up and I finished the race. I didn't win. Like I was a hot mess, really. Like chin, like off, like all like I'm sitting on the sidelines, freezing. Parents had to come, had to go to the doctor. Got all wrapped up and bandaged. But I went to school the next day. Now, one of the things that people know about me is I'm not missing school. Like, I don't care what, hell or high water, I'm going to school. I cannot miss. And so I had a an assignment due for my U.S. history class. Coach Smith. I don't know if you remember Coach Smith. He's another one of my favorites. Russell Smith was one of my best supporters. He was at the game helping with the track meet, and so he saw that I failed. He knew I'd gotten hurt, but I came to school the next day. You know what he asked me for? My assignment, and I'm like, Coach, you know. You know what happened to me. Like, I came to school, but I'm not finished. And it was like a homework assignment, and I think I got like a 30 something on it. I will never forget it. But to me, that was my great sports moment as a student athlete, right? Because he said to me, like, you came to school, that means you were well enough to get your work done. And I don't want you to ever make any excuses for why you don't complete stuff or why you're not living up to your greatest. But those two things made me really lean into my work as a student athlete. But it also, to me, came full circle that I didn't quit because I failed that time, because look at where I ended. And then ultimately, I'm in the Hall of Fame in Hoke County Athletic Hall of Fame. I mean, like, to me, that is like a culmination of a lot of different things and a lot of life lessons to me, which makes it even greater to me than winning, you know, that state championship, because you still had that support. I'm still having people push me. And I also, though, nobody really had to push me in terms of doing my work, but that just showed me that you cared. Like, you're at my game, you know what's happening, but you also care enough about me. And I'm gonna tell you, me and him, like, I mean, that man, you know, was another one of the greatest like teachers I've had that really supported me and pushed me throughout my entire career until he passed away. Like, we stayed in constant contact, and his nickname for me, I'll tell you, was Pharaoh. Like, he gave everybody nicknames in the class. But that kind of, that shows you, it goes back to what you asked earlier about what it means to be an athlete from Hoke County, right? It's more than just the sport. And I'll keep saying that. It's the community, it's the culture, it's the constant pushing you to be better than what you are, not just as an athlete, but as a human, as a person.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. That's my kind of my greatest sports memory, but it also kind of sums up, you know, again, what it means to be an athlete from Hoke County.
And I'll say, like, that's part of the reason that I created this podcast, because there's so many different stories that need to be told. And like I said, every episode that I've done, I just hear something different. And, you know, of course there's, you know, a lot of similarities, but it's just so crazy to hear, like, everybody's story is so different, their experience is so different. And you like think like everybody thinks that everybody's the same, you know, everybody's going to experience the same thing, but that's just not the case. And I think that, you know, I as much as we're underestimated, we are so powerful, and we have so much pride. And this is just like my flowers to Hoke County, my flowers to, you know, the athletes, the greats. I mean, and not even, you know, yeah, the greats, but people that actually have stories to tell. That's why I created this. And it just, like, every time I record an episode, I feel like it just kind of further drives the point home. And it just is like, God, I can't wait for people to hear this. I can't wait for people to hear this interview, because every interview has been so good, so good. So my last question is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a young athlete in Hoke County?
Oh, wow. I love that question. That is a really good question. One advice that I would give is, first of all, again, I would go back to that mirror. Know who you are first as a human being. You know, and as a young person, you're going to constantly evolve. Your character is constantly going to be shaped by your interactions and your experiences. That mirror helps you be rooted in the foundation of who you are. Your gut tells you who you are, because those are seeds that have been planted in you. And my mom always used to say, you're known by the company that you keep, right? So you need to be keeping good company. I always surround myself with people who are smarter than me, who have more talent than me, because I want to constantly be growing, right? I also want to be a good example and a role model, sure, and I want to support, I want to live my life first and foremost, so in the way that God would have me be, but I also want to let my light shine so that others can see that path. And there's always gonna be decisions that you make that you're gonna be kicking yourself and say, dang, I hate I did that. Why did I do that? Don't settle with just, you know, evaluating yourself based on that one decision or that one mistake that you've made. You can always learn and grow, right? Keep that mirror because it's your center. And then definitely, if you're the smartest person in the room, you don't need to be in that room. Right? And then I think perseverance is another thing that I would share is that, you know, along this journey, you know, there's going to always be trials and tribulations. That's just a part of life. And, you know, sometimes we want to give up easier without knowing what, you know, what the next step might be. But as long as you know you've given your 2000% to this pursuit and that is your passion, then continue to do it. There's going to be bumps in the road. You're not going to always be the best. You're not going to always perform the way that you want to perform, but you know, keep striving to be the best human that you can be, and then get the knowledge that you need about that sport, practice and do all those things, and then it'll pay off the way it's supposed to, regardless of whether it ends up in a professional contract or you get a scholarship to school or you become that, you know, all of that stuff. You never can determine what that can be, but you just got to take today. Am I the best person, human, whatever I can be for today? And then if I'm not, what can I do better tomorrow? That's what I would say to a young athlete from Hope County.
This interview has been just so good. So many gems. Actually, conversation that I haven't really had amongst the other ones. So I'm really excited for people to hear this one. And hopefully they pay attention. I'm hoping that people really are listening and like taking those gems. And it's so funny. I like everybody when I get the comments, people are like, man, that was so, like, they learn more about that person. And they took away something that I wasn't anticipating them, you know, taking, you know, or getting from it. So it's so good to talk to you. I haven't seen you in such a long time or heard from you in a long time. And like I said, you were somebody that I knew like growing up. So it's so good to see that you are well and prospering and, you know, doing amazing things. And I thank you again for this interview. Again, if you would like to follow the Next One Up podcast, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram at the Next One Up podcast, the Next One Up podcast.com. And we look forward to y'all, you know, coming back for another episode. Thank you so much. I want to say Miss Peter again.
You can say Miss Peter King. That's how you know me, right? You can say Miss Peter King. That's where everybody knows me, right?
Thank you.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we will see y'all next time.